Hi, I'm Steven Sitas. Welcome to Understanding and Extending the alpha360 ERP video. In this video lesson, we are first going through the initial code of the WX project and noting the important points of the project code. And second, we are going to use the limited asset data models already included in version 1.1 to build basic asset functionality in the ERP. The asset and fixed asset functionality will be part of the final ERP. We just kept it out of the current implementation on purpose, so we can use it for training purposes. Now let's first open the project and then go inside the project code. The project code, as all WX developers know, is the first code that is run in a web dev or a WinDev application. What is important right now are these structures over here. One is the STA360 dynamic window structure. We will use this structure to pass variables to the user interface. We use this structure for the WinDev implementation. There is also another structure, similar structure, that we use for the WebDev implementation, but we will see more about this in another video. Let's go a little down the project code. These are very important enumerations. We will talk about them later in later videos. And here is the first place where we start to really see important things. All previous code up to here was common code for both the WinDev and the WebDev implementation. You will see that this procedure, splogin-win, is included around a compile if configuration, meaning it will be run only if we are using the 32-bit Windows executable. Let's go in and see what this actually does. We use F2. In a few words, this is actually the main place for the login of a user in the WinDev application. These are not important right now. But here are the really important things from an implementation view. Let's just go and run the application and see a little things and talk about the terminology of the alpha360 ERP. I've already run it here. And just take a look here. The ERP, the B2B, the production, manufacturing, resources, etc., all these are called applications in the alpha360 ERP terminology. In the ERP application, we have the following functional areas: a CRM functional area, inventory functional area, etc. So, it is first an application and then functional areas of the application. As soon as I select a functional area, I get up here the procedures of the alpha360 ERP. And when we say procedures in the alpha360 ERP terminology, they are either Windows, internal or not, that does not matter, or pages for the WebDev implementation. Now, all applications, all functional areas, and all procedures of the alpha360 ERP are included inside dynamic arrays. We have seen these dynamic arrays in the project code over here. Okay? Now, let's go and see what does alpha360 activate actually does. It includes or excludes functionality and applications from our main menu. Let's go and see A360 activate in more detail. Now, this is where we add the functional areas. We have a record with this structure, and what we actually do here is we add a record that belongs to the application ERP and to the functional area CRM. This is this ERP and CRM entry in the menu. It's a double. It needs two things so it can be in the menu. It means it needs the application and it needs the functional area. In the A360 activate procedure, what we actually do is we build this structure here. If we want to exclude something from here or include it, we work in the A360 activate procedure. Now, what does the A360 load CRM do? Let's go with an F2. This is the area where we actually embed procedures inside the alpha360 ERP. Let's take a look at this procedure here. Let's go to accounting. Okay, and just let's take a look at the accounting procedures. Let's go back here. Here we are loading the accounting procedures. They are all of type STA360 procedure, and we add a record to a dynamic array. It tells us, we tell the application to which, we tell the ERP to which application it belongs. It belongs to the ERP. To which functional area, the name of the procedure for the WinDev implementation, the name of the procedure for the WebDev implementation. This I won't comment on this, I'll talk about it later. The caption, meaning that, let's take a look again here, that it would belong under the tree lists. Of course, we always translate it here. If you feel lost right now, just note that we will going to use all these dynamic arrays in a minute to implement the asset and the fixed asset data model. So it's not important right now. The only thing to note is that you must really understand now is that activate is the place where we actually add all our applications and functional areas to dynamic arrays so they can be available to the user interface of the ERP. And in these procedures, we load in dynamic arrays procedures that are used in the ERP. Now let's go to the data analysis area. We are in the accounting area, and here we see a very, very basic and limited model for the asset functionality. It just has two tables. The main table for the assets, and another table, it's the asset categories. So what it is, a 1 to 0 n relation. What this means is that every asset must belong to an asset category. What we are going to do now is we are going to first make a simple browse so a user can add the asset categories. Then we are going to make a more complicated browse form where a user can add an asset, or that must be always connected to one of these asset categories. At the same time, we must think, where will this asset functionality belong in our ERP, so we can work with the dynamic arrays inside the alpha360 ERP. Now, let's take a visual look at the alpha360 ERP. Here is where I'm going to embed or implement the asset functionality. It is going to be in the ERP application, in the functional area accounting, and I'm going to add the assets under lists over here. And remember, we have an asset category. I'm going also to add the asset categories in the administration area here. Administration isn't really an application, it's just something that belongs to all the ERP. And I'm going to add it in the accounting dimensions here. So let's get started. Let's start with first adding the entries inside the menu. Now I'm back to the area where I'm going to load the procedures inside the menu. Now, since I'm really not making any new application, and I'm certainly not making any new functional area, because I'm going to use the ERP and the accounting functional area, I don't have anything to do. I'm not going to do anything in the A360 Activate. If we go back to the visual, to see visually what's going on in the alpha360 ERP, we want to add it to the accounting under checks. So here is where we load the accounting procedures. Let's get inside them. This one here, this one here, GL accounts. This one here is the checks. I'm going to insert it under checks. So the easiest way to do it is just copy this, and I'll go through all the variables. Now, it's going to belong to the application, to the ERP application, to accounting. And I'm going to use an internal window for the browse of the assets. I'm going to call it, every internal window starts with IW in the alpha360 ERP implementation. B is for a browse, assets. This is the name of the procedure for the web dev implementation. I'm not going to work with it right now. It's going to be in under lists, and it's going to be called assets, but at the same time I'm going to use the internal translation mechanism so it can be translated automatically by the ERP. Now let's run it. Let's stop what is already running and let's go and see what we have done. Now let's go to the ERP, to the accounting area, and now we have seen that we have an entry for assets, but when we click it, it doesn't do anything because we have not yet implemented the procedure. Let's go on and add the same thing for the asset categories in the accounting dimensions. If you have seen our first videos, our pre-version 1 release videos, you have seen that the alpha360 ERP has really two types of tables: dimension tables and transaction tables. The asset categories are all of type dimension tables. Now let's go on and add the assets categories down here. Let's go to the administration area. We see down here that we are looking for the accounting dimensions. We could have made a new group. It doesn't matter, but it is we just decided to embed everything for assets inside accounting. Now let's go to the accounting dimension. I can do a search here for it. It is easier because it has a lot of entries here. And it's here. This is accounting journals. Okay. Now I'm going to copy this area. And it's just the same as before. The application, of course, now is called administration. It's in the functional area accounting dimensions, and I'm going to call this one asset categories. As before, I'm not going to add anything here, and I'm going to give it a caption here. And you may see that because it is version 1.1, there are some things that have not been translated. So I could have done it here. This would be better. Of course, this is in the final version 1.2, but it is not in the open source version. Now, let's stop it. Let's run it. And now we have what we did before, the assets here, and in the administration, accounting dimensions, we have the asset categories over here. Everything is looking good now from the user interface part of the application. Now we are going on with the actual implementations of the procedures for the asset functionality, for the basic training functionality for assets. What are we going to do? We are going to make a simple browse for asset categories, and we are going to make a complex browse for assets. This will include the user interface, but also business processors. Let's take a look here at how everything is organized in the Project Explorer. Although assets or checks belong to accounting, for flexibility reasons, we have them in different custom folders. So here we are in the Windows area. I'm going to make a new custom folder and I'm going to name it assets_W. I will add inside this folder all the user interface elements for the WinDev implementation. If you open here the pages, you will see that there are folders for the WebDev implementation. Now here we will add all the user interface elements. Under procedures here, I'm going to make a new custom folder. I'm going to name it assets_P for procedures. And I'm going to add inside this folder all the procedures that belong to the asset functionality. Now, you may have seen in the alpha360 ERP a kind of peculiar table called dummy. We are using this, we're going to use this one. First of all, it is not used anywhere in the ERP for data etc. It is used only in the templates or the so-called templates of the alpha360 ERP. It is just a dummy file. But of course it has some very basic fields in it. Now, let's go to the templates area here. And the first thing we are going to do is, no, let's start the other way. Let's go and make the user interface things, because I think it is a little easier to understand what we are doing. Let's go to the templates area. And remember, we are going to make a simple browse for asset categories. So what there are, you can see here, there are two internal windows of type browse. You can understand that these two are browsers because they are called, they start with the name IWB. We have one IWB_dummies and IWB_quick dummies. We use the quick dummies for the simple browsers, and we use these dummies for the more complex. Since we are starting with the asset categories, we are going to use the quick dummies. We open it. We do a save as. Remember, we called it asset categories. This is the name we used at the beginning of this lesson for the asset categories procedure. It belongs only to 32-bit Windows executable, and we are going to add it to the asset W folder. Let's close a few of these windows here. And it's now here. The first thing we do is we go to the code area and always remember to rename the procedure and give it the same name as the procedure. Let's stop the test here. Now, let's see the structure of a simple browse or a browse based on a quick dummy. First of all, this is a dummy table. We can delete it. What I'm going to do here now is I'm going to add my table. I'm not going to use a query because the asset categories are usually limited in numbers, 10, 20, 100, but they are not on the 10,000 or 100,000 numbers etc. So I'm going to work directly on a table, and this is where we always use the quick dummy table, or the way we use the quick dummy table. Now I'm going to go into the accounting area and select the asset category. This is my table. I'm going to let it display everything. I'm going to sort by name. I'm leaving it as read-only right now. Okay. Here is where I give the names of the table. I'm going to use the same for the French internal language. I'm going to fix it a little here. And I'm going to choose a style from the alpha360 ERP project, this one here. These two are the same, just this one has a header and this one does not have a header. Okay, I can fix it here. I'm getting inside and I'm going to hide this one. And this is the name. Depending on your programming style, I don't have something automatic here. I can use the column in front of the name. Okay? Now, let's see the structure of a simple browse table. What does it do? This thing over here does a refresh. It always calls embedded local procedures. It's here. We'll talk about these later. This is an add button. It always calls a local procedure that calls a business process. This is the edit and this is the delete. Now, we are 50% done now. What we have to do is we have to make the business processes for the simple browse. That's why you see all these arrows down here. Now, let's go down here where we made a folder for our procedures. We have the dummies here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make a new set of procedures for the assets. I'm going to call it PB assets. Sorry, for the asset category, PB asset category. These business processes will belong to all the project configurations, meaning that when I make them here, I don't have to recreate them in the web dev implementation. They belong in this custom folder. Okay? So now we have the asset category set of procedures over here. What do I need to make this user interface element functional? I need to make a quick add and a quick delete. Every simple browse inside the alpha360 ERP has a quick add business process and a quick delete. Editing is done through the user interface. But more complicated browsers have complete add, delete, get and modified functionality. Since this is a simple browse, we only need a quick add and a quick delete. I'm going to copy these two. I'm going to add them over here. I'm going to rename them. And I always use the name of the file. And now let's go and take a closer look to what asset category quick add does and asset category quick delete does. Now let's go inside the BP asset category quick add business process and let's see what we really have done. The first thing is we have used what I call a poor man's template. This is where we would like now to substitute, to change GDummy to the A asset category file. Just to be safe, I go down here to the text to find the current code view, to define, so it can highlight all the uses of the GDummy, so I can substitute it with my asset category table. And I don't forget anything. Okay, I copied this here. This code here just checks that the user has access to the asset category table. We will talk more about the options we have in the alpha360 ERP in the access options in a later video. Now, it tries to find in the asset category file something that has the name of the default. We always use the new record or the translate default name. If it is true, it means that the user has not done editing his previous record, and we will see what this means after a few minutes. If he does not find this record, he resets the file buffer. This one here is the reason why we must have a quick add, because every primary key for every table in the alpha360 ERP is a GUI ID. So we don't want to use a table to do adding inside any table of the alpha360 ERP. So it would be here. This is the primary key. This is the name. It's going to use the default name. And instead of using hadd or hdelete or hmodify etc, we have added new procedures called alpha360 underscore add or edit or delete that also take care of error handling. This is the gdummy, okay. And if everything is successful, we are going to return the primary key from the business process. Everything is done here. Now let's do it quickly for the quick delete. No, not quickly. I'll talk about this also analytically. Now we are going to check if the user can do a delete. And since we want to delete it, we check if it exists. We use the primary key. And if it's not found, it just returns a result is false. In most places where we do add or delete or modify in the alpha360 ERP, everything is included inside a transaction. The only places where things are not included inside transactions are inside quick adds. You will see that if we go back to the quick add procedure, you will see that there is nothing to do with transactions. But when we do a delete, because we may have categories, assets, linked to this asset category, we must include everything inside a transaction. So the first thing we do is we start a transaction. This is very important. You can see the code with an F2 if you want to, because the type of the transaction and the way it works depends on the database connection type. It is a little different if you work on a classic database or an HFSQL database, or as we will see in later versions in MySQL, Oracle, etc. This procedure over here takes care of all the small important things. If everything is okay, it goes and it deletes the asset category. And if everything is true, it does a 360 transaction end, which it actually means it validates and everything is okay. If there is an error, we have a cancel. And our two quick procedures are now ready to be used in the user interface. Now, you can see more information, you can learn more about the way we implement a quick add and a quick delete, and it's not string theory, it's not something very difficult. You can grasp it in a couple of minutes. Now let's get back, let's save everything. Let's get back to our main procedure here. And we can go and work here with the errors, or we can go here and work here. Now, let's go and see the UI add. What it does. It does a BP asset category. Remember how we name it? Quick add. Nothing else. Create translation. We don't need to do anything here. We want to, this is where we use the delete, the quick delete business process. But we must make sure that we have a valid, the user has selected a valid record. Even if he hasn't selected one, the BP will catch it later, but it's always wise to catch errors as soon as they immediately. Now we are going to use, remember the table is the asset category. This is the asset category dot. We need the primary key and we need to do a delete now. Let's go to the edit part. The edit part is the only part where we can use directly the table interface, because we have already a valid GUI ID for our primary key, and it's a very simple table and we don't have to do any real validation. So it's our account, our asset category, sorry. The only thing we do is substitute the G-dummy file with the file we are working on. The refresh, we refresh the table. The translation code is the same, the user access is the same. Now let's run it and see how things go. Let's go down to administration. Let's go to the accounting dimension, asset categories, and here is our table. Let's do an add. It's here. If we try to do another add, we have not completed the previous asset category. We can edit if we have, and we can call it asset number 1. We can add a new one. We can go on and work like now. Asset category 2, asset category 1, and if we don't like something we can delete it. Now this is how we do in a quick way, in a using poor man's templates, to add a simple browse functionality inside the ERP. Now we are going to construct or develop the complex browse for assets. This is called IWB assets, and it will also use a form called IWF assets. All browsers inside the WinDev implementation start with IWB, and all forms start with IWF. All windows, all window procedures inside the WinDev implementation are internal, are of type internal. They are not classic WinDev, they are not classic WinDev windows. Now, before with the simple browse, we created the user interface, and then we made the business processes. That's not actually the way we work. We always first design, create the business processes, and after that we make the we design the user interface. What do we need for this procedure, for this asset browse form asset procedure to work? We need an add, a delete, a modify, and a get. We need business processes of this type. What do? I get all of these and I copy them. I have done them behind the scenes so we can win some time in this video. And they are here in the PB asset. What actually I did, I renamed them from dummy to asset, and everywhere where there is the dummy file, I substituted it with the A asset file. So I'm ready now with a full set of procedures that I've done behind the scene, and I'm going to talk about them after the user interface. Then I go to the template area, this one, because it is a complex browse, and I just do a file save as. I've done it also behind the scene, and I've made this one IWB assets. The only thing here that I always make sure is that I go to the code and rename it here to the thing, to the IW asset, because it keeps the name of the previous, the copy, the one that I used to copy, this one. And here is what I'm going to use as a table, because this can have thousands or maybe millions of records. I always use a query so I can intelligently search or sort on this table. So I created a folder here, it's called asset query. I've done a simple query with a join of the A asset with the A asset category file, and I have populated this table over here. Now let's take a look at the embedded points in the local procedure here. It needs, let's start with the add. It needs to do an add. The way it does an add is through a form. It doesn't do it with the user interface of the table, so I also need a form. This is what it is going to be called, IWF asset. And here we will see how alpha360 actually works in forms. It works very, very differently than the classic way a WinDev application works. Now let's go to the template area. Let's get the IWF dummy. I'm going to save as. I'm going to call it asset. It's going to be used only the 32 window executable configuration, and I'm going to save it in the assets W custom folder. Now, before going inside the form, let's see how this is called from its browse. We don't need the templates anymore. Let's clean some things here and start over. This is the IWB assets. We do an add. The add, it comes from the template, always calls a local procedure called UI add. What does this do? This is where it calls the user interface. First, it constructs a structure called open window of this type. This variable will be passed to the IWB form. Every internal window, every usually a procedure, always receives this structure when it is called. Here we are telling this is going to be used in a form. Since this is going to be an add, we are going to use action equal 1 is an insert. We are going to open a window and we want to have a message on this window. Add asset. Since this we are going to add an asset. We will leave these two and come back later. Which is the form? The form is IWF asset. This is the one. And we want to give it an internal ID, so we will call it add asset. What is the purpose of this internal window ID? We'll see it in a minute. From where is it called? It is called from IWB assets. We could have used some keyword like my, something like that, instead of assigning it directly. There are reasons we are assigning it directly and not using a my type keyword. And when something happens to this window, with this form, something is added, etc. Here is a list of tables, of internal windows that must be notified. The only one that we want to notify here is the same window that called it. Now, what happens after this? This structure here is passed to the user interface. What happens from now on? It's up to the user interface. It may open it inside the desktop, outside the desktop, inside a dynamic tab, this dynamic tab, but it all depends on what the user's preferences, and everything is done automatically from here. Depending on the user interface, there are some important things that you must note. After calling the i360 open window, this doesn't mean that everything will go on running here. Sorry. I think I messed it up. There is no guarantee that after this window closes, everything will go on with the code over here. This is very, very important, especially with the dynamic tab interface. Now that we have seen something else, is that we are also using assigning a value for the standard window. It's WIF global, because there are the user interface works in many ways. It can be everything. A window can be embedded inside a dynamic tab, or it can float around using the classic open that we use with WX, with WinDev. Then we cannot use internal windows. We have to use a classic window. So what do we actually do? We embed this internal window in this classic window, and everything then is around this standard window, so we can use open thread, etc. Now, let's go on and see what happens with an edit. This is where I haven't changed anything yet. What a user actually does with an edit is he selects an asset from this table. So we must change it here. Let's change the name here to show that it comes from a query and it's not directly from the assets. We can also everything's okay. Now, what do? We select we do a table select on the table query assets. If the user has selected nothing, then we just return. Otherwise, we keep the primary key, and remember the primary key is always a string, a Unicode string. We keep it in this variable. Now we are going to construct this structure and pass it to the user interface. The action now is to, meaning it is an edit. This variable here has the primary key. This is the title of the window, so it is an edit asset, and it's enclosed inside the translation. The same standard window, we are going to embed it, maybe if we want to, if the user has chosen an embedded user interface in this dynamic tab. What is the name of the form? The same as before, and we are going to give it an internal name of edit asset plus the selected primary key. Why are we using this technique? Because this variable here, this value here, controls how many windows of the same type can be opened at the same time. By adding a selected primary key at the end of the edit, we can edit as many assets as we want in open windows inside our user interface. And as before, we are going to use assets and assets, and everything is going to be passed to the user interface, and we just forget it. Something else to remember is that we are not using any data from this window or from this query. The only thing we are going to use is the primary key. Let's also take a look at the delete. It works the same way. We just make sure that we have selected, the user has selected an asset. It doesn't matter because the form will catch the error if the user has not selected something, or in the meantime it has been deleted. This is the assets. Okay, we are not using. This is the primary key. Okay. Now, this is the action. Now the action is a delete. In the alpha360 ERP, the delete is action equals to 3. If somebody is wondering why we are using 1, 2, 3 for action, it is something that came from our old Clarion programming days. We also passed to the variable structure the primary key. What do we want to do? We want to delete an asset. The same here, the same here. We are going to use the same form. Now we are going to use an ID, it's called asset plus the selected primary key. Here is the assets, and we are going to notify the assets, and we are done with calling. We can see the errors here. We are done with calling the add, the edit, but where is the delete? In previous versions of the user interface, the delete used to be up here, but now it is in the action combo area. We will see it in a minute. What we do is we hide it from the user, so it's difficult for somebody by accident to delete an asset or a record etc. Now let's go and see the flow of the code inside this. When it's opened, it checks for user access. We'll see this in another video. It does any formatting, international things, etc. It does any initialization, and it does any translations. Every browse, complex or simple inside the alpha360 ERP has this kind of structure. It has. Now, here is where we add things in the actions combo. What we will do here is for nothing, and we just want a delete. Remember, we don't have any visual button for delete, and we don't have anything else right now. What does action do? Case 2, remember this is the delete here, we just added, sorry, in the init. In the combo, it's the second one. What does the action do? It calls the UI delete. So this is okay, this is an add, this is the translation, this is the delete, this is the edit, the format, the init, the print, the refresh. So what do? We execute the query. Remember, this is the asset query, and then we display the table. We select the first one. Why? It's not important here, and then we call the UI refresh row. There is nothing default in the UI refresh row. You can see it, of course, in other procedures, but what it actually does is that when a user selects something in this table, it refreshes data that are connected to this record in these tabs here. We are not using it right now. Now let's go on with the form procedure. Let's open it. Just make sure that it's called and here is the important thing. Every form, every browse, every procedure inside the alpha360 ERP is called in this way. It has a dynamic structure here, the return if there is a primary key, and the change if it has been changed, etc. Now let's see how things work. Remember, we are working on the asset table. So wherever we have dummy is a good place to look where we have to make changes. We always make two records of type A asset so we can keep the data we need during editing. Now let's see, we have made two records of A asset. This is the main one, this is the one we are going to work on, and this is where we start checking the user access. Let's see here, nothing here. Sorry. Any formatting we may have to do, the translating, and very important, the init. Now, just give me a minute so I can explain a few complicated things about what really happens here. Now remember that this one here, the IWF asset, is called by an insert, an edit or delete, it doesn't matter. Let's say that it is called by an edit. It's called here. But when is the call completed? The call is completed when your code passes from here. Never, never, never think that you can do things inside this area here and expect 100% that your form is embedded inside the dynamic, inside this structure here, inside your tab dynamic. Now let's go on and see what happens in the form procedure. Let's open it. Let's make it first. Let's see how we add fields inside the form. First of all, let's go here. This we are going to leave it as is. We are going to delete this one here. Let's go to the asset. Okay, so we don't need to show the user the primary key. We need to show him the name. Okay, oh, just forgot something. I'm going to leave this one here. I'm going to use this one. Now here is the important thing. In the alpha360 ERP, we never link fields to tables. We use the main record that we constructed over here. This is the main record. This is the one we are going to use for editing. So over here, description, and we are going to use this one. The created etc are already done. We don't need to do anything. They are not linked to anything. We will see why. The notes, we are going to change it. And we want to add a combo that will have our sorry, our asset category. Let's go and create a combo box. We are going to work directly on the asset category because, as we said, these are small dimension tables. I'm always going to return the primary key. I want to link it, and remember, I always link it to a variable, to my asset category variable. Okay. I'm calling it category, using the same for the French. I'm going just to copy this because I'm going to use it. Okay, I'm changing the style. I'm going to use the same height. Okay, some aligning, depends on my preferences, and I've got a category. Now every field is linked to a variable from one of the records, from my main records of type asset. Now let's go on and see what happens when everything, it starts here, here, it translates everything, and then it goes to the init. Let's see what this init, this is the most important procedure, user interface procedure in the whole of the alpha360 ERP. Let's see how it works. First of all, remember the action. If it is 1, then this button over here will change, will have to add or to anything we translate it to. If it's a 2, it's a save, mean an edit. 3, it's a delete, and 4 is a view, but so it doesn't, we can't do anything with a view, we just do an exit. Now, let's say that we are going to use the form for an add. That means that our action equals to 1. Then what we do is we reset the buffer of the file, this one. We could prime with default things like that. We don't want to do any priming. And then we let the refresh window work, and the user can add the things in, use the fields etc. And our first screen would always be here, this one. Now, if it was an edit or a delete or a view, then the first thing we try to do is we try to get the asset. Since this is a place, this is user interface code, we never use any kind of read, seek, first, etc. We always use our BP procedures. So what we do is we try to get this asset with this primary key. Remember, we have passed it before from the browse. If there is an error, the error will be returned over here. If it was successful, then both our records will get the same values. This is the original one, and this one with the C is the copy one. We need them so we can check them at the end. Now, this is created by who? By the user. Just give a friendly name. And the UI is done. So a user is now working over here. Let's take a look at description. This is absolutely necessary. Why? Because sometimes with internal windows embedded inside a dynamic tab, we may lose information switching from one window to another. This one, this screen to source, makes it sure that the user does not lose any information. Now, what can a user do here? First of all, he can cancel. Let's see what a cancel does. It calls UI cancel. UI cancel calls UI close, and depending on the UI the user has chosen, all these things must be done. But if he saves the record, what happens? If he validates is the right word to use, then it calls UI save. What does UI save does? First of all, it clean up data. It's important for most of the time to clean with no space etc your fields, so you don't have garbage and things like that. Okay, it's from save. The first thing, it cleans up data. It checks required fields. Which are the required fields here? It depends on the table you are working on. The required fields here are just the name, not only just the name, it is also the combo. Remember, if we have a combo of category. It checks to see that we have a valid asset category before it goes to the business processors, because the error will also be catched there. It checks required fields, and what it does, it's a simple switch here, and if we are doing an add, then we must call BP asset add we must pass it the record we are working on. If there is an error, it gets back returned to capture to the name field. If there is no problem, it goes to the close and closes the table. But if we are going to do an edit, the first thing it's going to do is check if these two records are the same. If the content of the two records are the same. If the content of the two records are the same, this means that the user hasn't done, he may played around with the data, but he hasn't changed anything. So what we actually do is just a cancel. But if the content of the two records are not the same, then we go on and we add, we call the PB add. And what do we pass to it? We passed the err_a asset record. And if it's a delete, the only thing we pass to the BP asset delete is the primary key of the A asset. Now, we seem to have a couple of errors. Let's see. Okay. Okay. Sometimes when you work with records, you may need to recompile the project because the development environment thinks that there are problems with your assignments. Now let's take a closer look at the business processes. Let's go to save again, see where they are called with an F2. Now here is where we do the add. This is the business process that we use to add assets inside the alpha360 ERP. Let's use an F2 and call it. As like all others, all other BPs, they usually come in a pair. The first one, the BP asset add, receives a record of a asset, the user, etc., and it starts a transaction. And then inside this transaction, it calls another BP asset add private with passing to it exactly the same variables that it had received. You can, of course, call this one directly, but then things would not be inside a transaction. Now let's see what happens in the BP asset add private. First of all, it returns, remember, it returns a false or a true. If it's a false, then the transaction is cancelled. If a true is returned, then the transaction is validated and everything is gone back for the user to work on. Now let's see what happens to the BP asset add private. It always resets the buffers. It transfers to the buffers the record that has been passed to the business process. We always don't forget to assign the GUI ID. who created it, and then we add it. Instead of using, as we said, the H add, we use alpha360 add instead. The alpha360 add instead, the alpha360 add, edit or delete have also another functionality. You can see it in the code. They have things they can do before an add and things they can do after an add. And what are these things? Especially when we are working with some tables, we have transactions that can, with one proxy you call, also add to our main transaction tables and to our sum tables. Remember that every add returns the primary key that has been added just now. Let's go and see how things work. The same way it works with modify. Delete is a little more simple because the only thing we have to pass to it is the primary key. Now, let's go and run everything right now. Let's go to a login. Now, if you remember, we have already added inside the accounting dimension two asset categories. We are going to the ERP, to the accounting area, to the assets. Let's go and add an asset, car 1, select a category, and it's there. We want to edit, it's here. We want to delete, it's here. And remember, in the final edition of the ERP, the asset will have also transaction tables connected to the assets and to the sales area and to the purchases area, and of course assets will be connected to the resources, to the fleet resources and other resources also. Now, a few moments only and we are ending this video, but just to make a few important notes. First of all, let's go inside one of the forms and see the way we close a form. First of all, we cannot just do a close my window. The only time we can do a close my window is when the user has selected the classic interface, the standard interface. That means that it has used classic Windows. If he has used the user interface that uses the dynamic tab, then there must be a lot of house cleaning. All the code is here. It is not our intention in this video to talk more about the dynamic interface, the user interface, because we don't have time and it's not. It wasn't our intention. Now, something that maybe we didn't talk about at the beginning. Okay, let's run it once again. First of all, we understand how things work here, how we add a record, how we edit a record. The code is here. We call this alpha360 open window, passing this structure with this variables. But how do we open these browsers in the first time? How do we open GL accounts? How do we open checks? How do we open assets? Well, actually with the same user interface code. Let's take a look. Let's close some windows, stop the test, go to our main menu, and take a look at the code here. What really happens here is that depending on the selected tree, on the click the user does on this tree here, that is, a tree is actually just a window, a complicated window of course. We have also here a dynamic window. We have titles, we have actions, we have the dynamic tab, and everything from here is passed to the alpha360 open window, and it works the same way the browse form works. It is not any different at all. Now, before closing this rather long video, let me tell you why we did this mostly procedure approach to the design of the alpha360 ERP, and we did not choose a more object-oriented approach. The main reason is because we wanted to have most of the code the same across the WinDev and the WebDev implementation, and the mobile, the Java and the Linux versions that we are going to implement in the future. We were not sure that version 21, the one that we are working on, had the same OP functionality across all the products. But we think that in later versions, some of parts of mainly the user interface may change to a more object-oriented design. Thank you very much for watching.